Richard Solomon here. Greetings. Taking care of business. If it's rock and roll music, it's only one of two people. It's either Epi or Tom Vogel. We got Tom Vogel. There we go. All right, and that is Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull doing It's a New Day Yesterday, but it's an old day now. And in the world of business, that is an absolute maxim. It was a new day yesterday, but, who are you? All right, Richard Solomon, taking care of business. I asked the crack production team, not the people who make crack, but the people who actually are a crack production team, to ask Tom to come back and visit us once again, because he did such a great show with us on crisis communication. I said, could you come back? So he actually schlepped all the way back. We got him to schlep back. And, because we had such a good time the other week that we did this. So welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
It was great, the first show. By the way, it'll be posted on YouTube if it's not there already, with all our other shows. And this one we're going to do a little bit different, which is sort of relevance. Maybe that's the best way to relevance. How do you stay relevant? I think Ed Koch wrote a book on like sort of being relevant. Everybody's a bagel store. Everybody sells soda. Everybody has a water company. I remember I represented a client who wanted to go into the vodka business. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like, well, how do you elbow your way? I went into a liquor store, and there was literally like 20 shelves of vodkas: potato vodka, grain vodka, vodka from Poland, vodka from Russia, vodka, organic vodka. There was all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was like, how do you actually elbow your way in to become relevant when there's such a crowded marketplace of other people doing exactly what you do, mm-hmm. sometimes better, certainly, if you're new, they're more well known. How do you actually advise businesses on getting their name out and being relevant and to be able to jump into being something bigger than just infancy?
Well, one of the best ways is have a great story. I mean, having a great product, which just goes without saying, you need to have a great product. But a lot of people have great products, right? And some of those products are similar to the one that you might have.
Like memory chips, right? They're
right.
They're all good, but why do I get brand A over brand B?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And one of the great things about running a company and having a great product, it's not just about the product you're selling. You're selling an idea. You're selling a vision. You're selling a vision of yourself in many ways. Having a good story is. I'll talk about without naming any names. A client that I had who ran a financial services company that sold a product that a lot of people had, but he was a genius in getting people to write about him because he was indefatigable. He was willing to go anywhere and talk to anyone about his product. But it gets to a point where, okay, we've already written about your product. We've already written about, how wonderful it is. We're only going to do a story like that once a year, maybe. What do you got for me now? Like, why would I want to talk to you now? So you get to this point where you're not selling your product because you've already sold the product. People know you're selling it, but you still want to be relevant. You want people to write about you. One of the things that we do with our clients at Jay Connolly is because you can't always be selling. You can't be self-promotional. In fact, journalists get sick of it. After I was a journalist for a long time, and once I've done the story about how wonderful you are and how wonderful your product is, I'm not going to be doing another one until something happens, something new. Either a new product, or you get really big, or you're aligning with, you have new customers, something interesting. But beyond that, those are obvious sort of ways of getting your story out there and continuing to get it out there. Beyond that, and the growth story, we're doing so fantastic. Beyond that, a way to be relevant and become interesting to the media covering you is to become a source for them on the industry that you're in, so that you are someone they can come to and they'll say, hey, Richard, what do you think about this memory chip maker's sort of what they're doing, or what's going on in the industry in general? What are the latest? I mean, journalists are always looking for a new story, the next news story. You can be a source for them for those stories, or you could comment on the new stories that they're working on, so that when you do come back to that moment where, oh, we have a new product, or we're growing wonderfully, or we have some really fantastic new board members, whatever it might be, they've already been talking to you about all these other things, and they look at you as someone who's sort of a source for the industry, not just a source about yourself. Another way of coming at this is contrarian story.
What's that?
A contrarian story is, let's say, let's use memory chips as the example, since we'll stick with that. Actually, no, let's use coconut water, okay, since you so kindly gave me some here. Let's use coconut water as a story. Let's say a contrarian story about coconut water is don't drink it.
Okay. Or don't drink too much.
Don't drink too much.
Don't drink too much.
Why you should not drink coconut water, which is exactly the opposite of what everybody else is saying. No, I'm just coming off the top of my head here. But another more sort of maybe realistic example is sort of a contrarian story is why you should not be investing in this market or whatever it is everybody else is investing in right now. Or why what everybody says is a terrible idea is actually a good idea. That's a contrarian story. And journalists, readers, editors love contrarian stories. I mean, pick up the newspaper, probably a third to half of the stories you read are contrarian stories. They're not what you would imagine.
But why do journalists love that?
Because well, let me put it this way. If you have to spend all day long, news is what? News is something that's interesting, relevant, right? Something that surprises you. Contrarian stories are surprise. They surprise people. I read one the other day that was sort of an odd story, but it was about somebody who had gotten a pet turtle. but they were writing about, like, why would anybody get a pet turtle? And I was like, and I was immediately interested, like, why? But the headline for the story was, this turtle is going to outlive its owners. It was a particular kind of tortoise, actually, that lives up to 135, 150 years. And I thought, well, that is interesting, because it's not really about owning a pet. It's about what was interesting and unusual and contrarian in a way was how this pet was going to outlive its owners. And I read the story just because of that headline. It's going to outlive its owners. And I'd never thought of that before, because usually pets don't outlive their owners.
Actually, as a lawyer, I can actually tell you that the one circumstance that seems to always come up is parrots. Like African gray parrots live to be like 80 years old.
Well, I did not know that.
And what happens is, let's say you're 50, right? Get a couple of parrots. Well, you got to put in your will where Tweety and Pretty Bird are going to go. Who's going to take care of them after you're gone? Because let's say you make it to 90. Well, they still have a whole pile of years after you're gone. And someone's got to take care of them and what's going to happen to them. So, yeah.
And that's a story you weren't expecting. It's an unusual story, right?
Right.
It's unusual to you. Well, here's another idea of a story. Just because it's old hat to you doesn't mean it is to everyone else. You just gave me a perfect example. You've heard about these parrots that people have to put it in their wills. Right there. Like putting pets, there's a story right there. Why you need to include your long-living pets.
Yeah, exactly.
In your will. See, right there, that's not necessarily a contrarian story. That's like, oh, gee whiz, I didn't know that. That is another story that another way, if you're at a company and you could come out, or an individual, and you're trying to raise your profile, you've already sort of made the rounds, everybody knows who you are, coming back with a fact like that, gee whiz, I didn't know that kind of story. Is another way of raising your profile. The contrarian story, and my favorite, besides the contrarian story, is sort of the narrative. Like sometimes like look at Steve. I'm not necessarily saying Steve Jobs was defending his life, his personal life, but as a lot of what people know about Steve Jobs now wasn't really known as Apple was growing, its first and second and third iterations. May not have been the greatest thing for him personally or the company, but I'm using it as an example of here's stories about Steve. I mean, when you think about Steve Jobs now, what do you think of? You think about Apple, and you also think about a lot of things that came out of
the movies.
The movie, right? His personal life.
Weren't there two movies? There were two different movies.
Yeah,
yeah.
But you think about, and in that case, it may have sort of undermined or maybe hurt his legacy in a bit, these stories about his personal life. But there are positive ways they're coming back. Like we have clients that are, I have a couple executives that I work with that are very into yoga or very into meditation. And they have a different way of managing their employees than I've seen other people do. These are all ways of raising your profile. There's one company that we worked with that, the executive told us, we have. I asked him, how many employees do you have? Oh, we have about 12. 12, and you don't seem like you have 12. You seem like you have like 10 times that number. Well, this is because we do this. We outsource a lot, and we use a lot of tech, and we don't need to have hundreds of employees. We have 12. But next year we're going to have like 48. So still small, but but there's a story right there. It's not about their particular product, but it's how they make that product, how they sell their service that was unusual and different. And there's also the cultural side of it. There's a great column in the New York Times called Corner Office, which I'm sure you've seen. It's sort of interviews with executives and their sort of philosophies on how they manage challenge, how they manage their business. But it's always not conventional wisdom. It's like what you weren't expecting. That's what makes that column so interesting. Every time you pick it up, you read it, and you're like, here's an executive talking about a way of dealing with a problem or growing my company or dealing with issues in my company in a way that no one else has done, or at least I haven't heard of before. That's what makes the column so interesting, being unique.
Yeah, fresh ideas, yeah.
Exactly. One of the other ways, then there's content, contributing, writing, getting your opinion out there. One of my favorite examples of this is a guy named Mohammed Al-Arian, who used to be president or co-president of PIMCO and now an executive alliance, but used to be covered emerging markets, a guy I interviewed a number of times when I was a journalist. He's an academic. Before he became known as being a big money manager, fixed income manager, he actually worked at the World Bank or IMF, PhD. And Mohammed writes a column for the FT, constant commentary on LinkedIn, and it's gotten to the point where you go to LinkedIn and he's like one of the top influencers on LinkedIn. He wasn't that way 10, 15, 20 years ago. He is now. But he raised his profile by sharing his unique take or insights on the area of business that he's in. So he became a brand in and of himself. It's to the point now where people are like, oh, what does Mohammed think about this? I actually want to know what Mohammed Al-Arian thinks, because we know that he writes his own stuff and he's speaking from experience, and he's one of the smartest guys around. Another guy that used to do this was a guy that he used to work with at PIMCO, a guy named Bill Gross, who, when I was a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, and this is another way of sort of raising your profile, I highly recommend that executives think about this when they hire a PR firm, about making themselves available for journalists. When you say you're going to be available for journalists, it usually doesn't mean, okay, let's talk tomorrow at 5 o'clock. It usually means, I just called you 5 minutes ago. Can you call me back now?
Yeah, right.
It's never like, let's make an appointment to have our hair done next week. It's now. And what Bill Gross did at the beginning, and this was 20-some years ago when I was a reporter covering credit markets at the Wall Street Journal, I needed to write a column every day about what was going on in the bond markets. And Bill Gross, one of my colleagues said, I call Bill Gross at PIMCO. He's great. He's always available. And here's the thing. He was always available, but he didn't talk to everyone. I mean, I was a Wall Street Journal reporter, so I was probably lucky in the sense that if I called him, he talked to me. But he knew what he was talking about, and he was always available. And here's the thing. This guy is investing billions and billions of dollars in the fixed income markets. He's very often, probably, as most people are commenting on the markets who are in it, talking his book, right? But when I asked him, but he was a guy who I could go to and ask, what do you think about this trend or that trend today? How is it affecting the markets? What's your view on it? He was always available. And the more, if you hire someone like me, or if you're going to do it on your own, I would suggest hiring someone like Jay Connolly instead. It's a lot more effective. If you're going to want to raise your profile in the media, you have to make time for them. And you have to assume that they're not going to be on your schedule, because they're not.
Oh, yeah. And they always call you with a deadline. It's always like, I need a comment because we're going to press at 5. And you look at your watch and it's like 4:37.
Exactly. Well, hopefully, if you've already sort of developed what I call lead steers, the 5 or 6 journalists that cover your industry or cover your company that are the most influential, and you already know them, they won't be calling you up at 4:30 for 5 o'clock deadline for a comment. They'll call you a little earlier. Or if they do call you at 4:30, at least you have a pretty good idea before they call what they're going to need, because you know them well. But having those kinds of relationships makes a huge difference and allows you to reach out, not just be reactive, but proactive as well.
What I'd like to talk about maybe in the next segment is creating brand awareness and uniqueness, because I think that'd be very, very interesting for the people out there.
Sure.
All right. So this is Richard Solomon. This show is Taking Care of Business. We have Tom Vogel, who was nice enough to come back. He is with Jay Connolly, jconnolly.com, which is spelled Jay Connolly, Connely. I can't even read anymore. My eyes are bad. .com.
You got it right.
They have a great website, and they have, of course, all the social media that goes with it. And they've got great people, and they're lots and lots of fun, and they're incredibly knowledgeable. And you would like to probably refer to our other show as well, because if you're loving this, you'll even love that one just as much. So with that, we'll be right back, and maybe we'll even have some more rock and roll, rock and roll analogies. So we'll have to search the music files and see what we got. But we'll be right back.
Searching for my lost shaker sock. Some people claim that there's
And that is Margaritaville. And Margaritaville, believe it or not, is a brand of Jimmy Buffett's, because there's the Margaritaville stores and bars, and he has he has the beer, he's got the tequila. When you think about it, somebody, I don't know if it was like a financial journalist, but someone commented that Margaritaville, the song, is worth an enormous amount of money, and we're talking like hundreds of millions of dollars in brand value.
With or without salt?
With or without salt. So let's talk about brands. I guess basic question: how do you create a brand, and why do you want one? And what is a brand? What does it really do for you?
Well, I have to riff a little bit on the Margaritaville. There was a story about, I think we mentioned it in between segments, about the Margaritaville or Jimmy Buffett retirement community. So there's a brand there. And that's actually a good segue into what a brand is. I mean, a brand is an idea. It's not a product. It can be.
Is it a reputation?
It's everything wrapped into one: vision, reputation, an idea. I mean, when you think about Apple, for example, what is it? When you think about Apple as a brand, what do you think of? Do you think of?
I used to think of innovation way back when, because they had a lot of things that were different, like the iPod, and they had certain things that were just like the Mac Air. They had certain things that just nobody else did.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, I mean, it's not a product though. It's not Apple. I mean, people think of Apple, they might think the smartphones, but it's not a particular product. When you think of Apple, you think of. I still think it's about innovation. I think it's about ease of use. It's about something that it's kind of like a club, actually, because
Well, it's a community.
It's a community.
Absolutely.
Like, when you think about somebody who owns a Windows computer, you really don't get the same feeling, from Microsoft as you get from nothing against Microsoft. Microsoft has a different brand than Apple does. Apple, if you like, you're joining a community. You're joining
it's an experience,
right? And it also has sort of connotations of, this is something that artists use. I mean, when you think about which kind of laptop, if you were to put two laptops in front of, and one's an Apple and one's not an Apple, and you'd say, which is the one that a graphic designer, an artist, a photographer, which is the one they're going to pick? And probably in reality, they're going to pick the Apple, right?
Right. Final Cut Pro. Yep.
And for a variety of reasons, right? Maybe, but beyond that, I think it's an idea, and it's what makes it's the most valuable asset that any company has, which didn't used to be. Let me put it this way: it's become, in an age of social media and 24/7 media coverage, it's become clear that the most important assets that companies have aren't their products. I mean, their products, yes, one of the most important, but their brand is actually as important as their products and their employees and their customers, and their stakeholders. But the brand is actually people come to realize that is more important to a company than before social media. In the last 10 or 15 years, it's become increasingly obvious. Actually, The Economist did an entire issue about brand recently.
So that begs the question: has it changed? Has the meaning of brands, has that changed from, say, the 1950s to the 70s to today, where maybe when you made a ketchup, you were like, oh yeah, this is the best ketchup, or this is the best mayonnaise, whereas now it's something completely different than that?
I think it has changed in the sense that companies have come to realize how valuable their brands are. There's actually a dollars and cents value. I think that the power brands, if anything, it's become bigger with social media and with 24/7 media coverage. But when I think about brand, I mean, what is it? The Maytag repairman, this is something that has
the loneliest guy.
The loneliest guy, right? I mean, but what's the idea there? Is that their product is so good that it never needs to be fixed, right? And people still think about that Maytag now. I think that in that sense, I don't think it has changed much. What I do think has changed is the speed with which a brand can be hurt, destroyed. Maybe not destroyed, but definitely damaged, and much more quickly. For example, over the last couple of years, what's happened with, and I'm going to use two auto companies as examples here. One, Toyota, the other one, Volkswagen. Okay. Toyota, the brand of Toyota had a great reputation for what? Reliability, safety, right? They last forever. They're economical but safe and last forever and reliable. And they had some issues. I can't remember what part of the car, but they had some issues where they needed to have some recalls. It was huge the last couple of years. And they had a bit of a slow response in sort of dealing with this, but they eventually came back to regain the trust of consumers by saying, hey, we're going to fix this, we're going to pay for it, we're going to do these recalls. But they had built up a lot of credibility of their brand at Toyota that people really wanted to go back and trust Toyota again. They had that sort of, how should I say, a brand investment or credibility. And Volkswagen, another brand that similar in some ways to Toyota for reliability, safety, right?
Herbie the Love Bug.
Well, that too. And
that was done to make their image, like a warm and fuzzy image. Yeah.
And they've taken it on the chin over the last couple of years over the issues with the emissions, and they still are. It's still coming out. They haven't quite turned the corner on that yet, but there's a brand that, I mean, and of course they're taking it on the chin with the billions they're going to be paying in fines, but in the end, what's going to help Volkswagen come back is regaining the credibility of consumers, but also building their brand up again. I think the same thing that Toyota was able to do, Volkswagen will be able to do eventually. It's going to take them, this is a long-term investment, but if as a long-term investment, you have an opportunity, I think you have a greater chance of bringing your brand back the longer you've had one around, like Volkswagen and Toyota. Though, again, now you look at, in a more recent example, Samsung, right? I mean, I've got a Samsung here.
No, I do too, but
And-
not on an airplane.
Yeah, exactly. So they're in the midst of this, right? I mean, their brand, their reputation was, cheap, not cheap, but economical, reliable products, innovative, and then suddenly
And an alternative to Apple.
as an alternative to Apple going back, right? And sort of an Apple killer in a sense, especially with the Samsung, the smartphone I have. I can't remember what the name of them, but whatever the model
Galaxy.
is. Galaxy, there we are. It's like, unless it's printed on the phone, I can't remember the name of it. But again, a brand taking it on the chin. Going back to our past episode, we were talking about crisis communications. They did a huge recall, the right thing to do. Eventually, if they keep on doing the right things, they'll be able to get they'll be able to rebuild the value of their brand. But let's not forget, I mean, these Samsung, Volkswagen, Toyota, they already had brands. They didn't lose them. They didn't disappear. They're taking some dents, some bigger than others, right? But they have a foundation that they can build on. They just need to get back. I don't know. I hate to say this. It's kind of a cheesy phrase, but getting back to basics, the vision of the company. What do you stand for? And in each of these three companies, what they stand for hasn't gone away. They just had some missteps. I don't want to make it seem smaller than it is, the problems at Volkswagen and Samsung, but definitely missteps. But it doesn't mean they can't come back. I mean, they absolutely can.
Well, let's look at some history. I'm going to mention a couple of things. Chunky. Let's see, that was one. Tylenol. And let me see, there was another one I was thinking of, but I forgot. But let's go with Tylenol and Chunky. Tylenol had the problem where somebody was tampering with their product. People got poisoned. And
people died.
And Johnson & Johnson had a major problem on their hands because somebody, it wasn't a product failure. It wasn't the formula was wrong. Somebody was literally tampering with their product to the point where there was hysteria in the news and all kinds of other stuff. And that was a tremendous hit on their brand. And it wasn't even their own doing. Sometimes, like, say, with Samsung was a product defect. All right. So their engineers didn't make something right, or they didn't do enough product testing, the quality control. But here, Tylenol did nothing wrong per se. And here they are dealing with something horrendous that was a brand hit. And I remember there was something with Chunky where they were off the market for a while, and then they came back on. I don't know if it was something with the formula, this or that, but let's talk about that, because those are, especially Tylenol. Tylenol is a big business, and all of a sudden a gigantic business is in a death throw, literally, for its life. And how do you build your brand back from something like that, which is devastating, long-term, short-term, the whole bit?
Well, in the case of Johnson & Johnson, right?
Yeah.
And that's a classic example that people always use, crisis communications. But it's worth going over and saying what did they do? What was how did they come back from that? And I think the first thing to remember, going back to the beginning of our conversation, is what is a brand? Is it the product? No. It wasn't the Tylenol. That's not their brand. Their brand for Johnson & Johnson was, you can trust us. That was what part of their brand. That was their brand message, is you trust us.
We'll take care of you.
We'll take care of you. And that is what got them. It's like, well, we don't trust them anymore. Right? So what do we do to regain people's trust? It may cost a lot of money, and we're going to take it on the chin, but what do we stand for as a company is that you trust us, you bring our products into your home for when your kids are sick, when you have a headache or your back, or whatever, because it wasn't just Tylenol. They sell all kinds of other products that people were worried about those being tampered with as well, most likely. So their brand was connected with trust. It was connected with, being able to bring their products into the home, and it had been badly damaged by this crisis. So what did they do to regain confidence? They immediately removed Tylenol products, and I don't think it was just Tylenol products. They removed a lot of other products, I believe, at the same time.
I think they emptied the shelves. Yeah, I think they just. Yeah.
And what did they do? They came back, and now this is just standard in the drug industry. And
tamper resistance.
And packaging in general, not even just for drugs. I mean, for almost everything now.
Olive oil.
Yeah. Well, maybe not. We've got to work on the olive oil front. It's like, I still go to the store and I'm like, is it olive oil or is it mixed with something else? There's some issues there. But the tamper resistant containers for medicines and other things as a result of that. But what did they do? They reestablished their brand, which was focused on trust. You can trust us. You can bring us into our home. And we're willing to do it. And we're going to do everything necessary to make sure you're safe.
Did they accomplish what was necessary to bring their brand back?
Well, let me put it this way. Yes, and the thing to remember about this in terms of getting your reputation back, it's not so much sort of getting your reputation back. It is regaining people's confidence, and it's not going to happen overnight. It seems like it happened really quickly with the Johnson & Johnson Tylenol. This is 1982, if I'm not mistaken, when that happened. It actually took a few years, I believe, for them to come back. It didn't just happen overnight. But going back to our previous earlier in the segment, we were talking about the value brands. That was their most valuable asset, Johnson & Johnson. So anything they could do to restore their brand was worth doing. Because if they don't have their brand, it didn't matter how great their products are. No one was going to buy them. No one was going to trust Johnson & Johnson anymore. They were going to be someone that you did not want to have in your home.
So let's look at the flip side. You have a phenomenal brand, right? Phenomenal brand. People rip you off. Counterfeiting. What do you do as far as brand management in your line of business when there's fake watches, fake airplane parts, fake olive oil? You know, they actually take I think they take rapeseed oil and they repackage it and they say this is olive oil, and it's not. It's because olive oil became very expensive. Mm-hmm. So what do you do with the counterfeiting issue? Because that is definitely attack on your brand, that it's being knocked off, or you're people say, oh, this is like a computer and it looks like the logo, but it's really not, and it's a piece of junk. Mm-hmm. So what do you do with all of that, or even counterfeit pharmaceuticals?
Well, let me go back to I had a client, not when I was working with Jay Connolly, another firm, but it's and I'm not going to mention the client's name. Let's just say they were selling a product that was an all-natural product. That was actually, this is public. I think I can talk about it. It was
it's just you and me and a million people.
Yeah, you and me and a million people. No, but it was basically the government of Portugal had a campaign to deal with this very issue with cork, natural cork used to bottle wine. They had taken a big hit, and Portugal is one of the biggest exporters of natural cork, producers and exporters of natural cork for wine in the world. They started a campaign to show why people should use natural cork and why you shouldn't be using screw caps or plastic corks.
Box.
Or box. Well,
box of wine.
But basically it was, why use natural cork? Now, it's not exactly analogous to a counterfeiting, but it's sort of, here's a substitute product that is cheaper and does the same thing. So why should I use natural cork instead of using a screw cap out to bottle my wine or plastic cork? Without getting into all the details, what we did was make the argument that, well, cork's been used for thousands of years, and there have never been problems with anybody getting sick from cork, There have been issues. The reason why the screw cap and the plastic cork industry sort of gained a foothold, especially in countries like Australia and New Zealand, where most wine is actually screw cap wine, was because the cork industry had problems with sort of quality control. And wine, they were being blamed for cork causing wine to be, this is where the term corked comes from. For some reason, there's something that people who were making these alternative closures said came from natural cork and was ruining wine, right? So their response was that what their brand was natural cork, good for your wine, and what they added on to that, their international campaign, is also good for the environment.
Okay.
Which it's harder to make that argument with stuff made out of plastic and metal. And cork can be recycled. Cork biodegrades. No health issues with cork. But they were making the argument that maybe with these other closures, there are some issues. Who knows? I'm not going to make that argument here. But they made it about sustainability and about the environment. And they also embraced something that a lot of people weren't aware of, was just that a lot of people think that cork is cork trees somehow suffer when you harvest cork from them, when actually it's the best thing for them.
They regenerate or something like that?
No, they shave off the outside, and the trees actually last. I mean, you're not cutting down cork trees to make cork for wine. You shave the cork from.
It's like sheep shearing.
In a way,
yeah.
And it's something a lot of people didn't realize. Even very sophisticated wine buyers didn't realize that that's where cork comes from. That's another reason why, the sustainability argument was one that worked for natural cork.
All right. Richard Solomon, Tom Vogel, and the usual rock and roll music. We'll be right back. Richard Solomon, welcome you back to Taking Care of Business. My guest is Tom Vogel, and we are just rapidly moving through very fast radio because he's just a wealth of information and a phenomenal communications guy. All right,
Thank you.
So let's now talk about emerging trends. I have a good friend, Gerald Salenti. He's a trends forecaster, and people always say, what does he really do? And it's like he extrapolates. He takes what's here and he's able to look into the future through not because he has a crystal ball, but so much he's an extrapolator. So what are the things that do you see that are brand focused, that are sort of more new to the current world? I mean, the things I see is there's more about, the environment, sustainability, organic. You hear things about corporate responsibility. You see things about, being a good corporate citizen. What are the things that you see that people, like when companies made tires and ketchup and mayonnaise and pepper and hot sauce, 50 years ago, that's what they did, Goodyear made tires, and they had a blimp and that was it.
They still do, I think.
And then it was like, it's like, hey, Goodrich doesn't have a blimp. Remember all that stuff from those commercials? But now it's all different. It's really different in the sense of now it's, we're a sustainable business, or you look at what people are trying to sell. People sold cars for a long time, and it was not till much later on that safety was something that you'd actually sold. It was almost things that the car business almost fought against, all these regulations from seatbelts and this and that. Don't tell us how to run our business. To like, no, we 5-star on the crash test, and we had a barrel full of glass china. We smashed it at 100 miles an hour, and it all survived. And this and that. So what are the emerging trends, and what seems to be sticky in those trends that seems to be more effective?
You reminded me of when you talked about cars. I mean, you and I are both old enough to remember when, it wasn't required to wear a seatbelt.
They took me home from the hospital. My mother sat in the back seat and held me. Now, I know that today that would be against all law because, when we took our kids home, we had to have them in an approved safety seat that was inspected by somebody from the hospital.
Exactly. And we're both parents, and I look back at, some of the things we take for granted now with our kids, and I look back at what I had great parents. I'm sure you did too. And some of the things that they did back then would be against the law now.
Oh, I'll give you one. My mother tells the story that the physicians in the day smoked in the delivery room. Mm-hmm. Okay, could you imagine?
Exactly. My dad, speaking of cars and car safety, remember the Pinto?
Sure.
Okay, my dad had a Pinto, and right around when the problem with the Pinto was that the gas tank was right in the back, and I think what was happening is that anybody got rear-ended who was driving a Pinto, it would burst into flames, and the whole car would blow up. It was pretty dramatic. So my dad came home, one day, 2 or 3 weeks after all these stories coming out, and he's like, "I've got to get rid of the Pinto, da-da-da. And someone had run into him back. Did not explode though. I remember to this day. But anyway, getting back to, one of the things I think that's becoming, we talked about green, people are willing to pay more if it's better for the environment, however that might be. That's one one thing. But what actually another trend, and we have all sort of corporate responsibility, social responsibility. People are willing to pay more for something that's sourced in such a way that, if I'm getting coffee from Latin America, it's a fair trade coffee, and everybody's getting paid better than they would have been otherwise. But I think one of the, and I didn't mention this when we were chatting, it just sort of occurred to me, but I think one of the big trends right now is less is more. Is having, especially amongst, people in their 20s and 30s, so-called millennials, the idea that we don't need to have as much stuff as we had before. I mean, if you go, it's amazing. If you go to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal and just Google clutter, on their sites, and there's you'll find dozens of articles just on those two sites, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Pick and Google, on this site, clutter, and it's mind-boggling how many stories come up with how to get rid of junk, how to get rid of small.
Well, there are companies that advertise on the radio,
right?
Where it's like, oh, the people that do the magic, just point and it's gone,
right?
Yeah.
And there's how to get rid of clutter, how to get rid of junk, how to live a simpler life. You can look at it as decluttering sort of objects in our life, material possessions, but I also think living a simpler life also extends to, our relationships, where we live, how much, what kind of car we drive. There's a real trend towards making life simpler, more transparent, and that's another trend, transparency. I work with a number of clients at Jay Connolly that are in, financial services, mainly what we call fintech, financial technology, a lot of them in wealth management. And if I was going to pick one trend that all of these clients that we have are tapping into, it is transparency and simplicity. Their clients want to know, they want to have a much clearer idea of what they're paying for and what they're getting for it. You see these commercials, and I'm not going to name, actually there's a number of brokerage companies that are making similar commercials that are about how much are you paying your advisor. It's like, well, I don't know how much I'm paying my advisor. And do you have a guarantee? Well, that's not how it works. But and a lot of our clients are involved in financial advisory business. And one of the big things that they're growing their business on is by making their transactions more transparent, about making it clear to their clients how much they're paying, giving them choice, making it easier to use, and finally leveraging technology. I can't stand people overuse the word leverage. We tend to use it a lot, leveraging, innovation, innovate. But that's what these companies are actually doing. They're using data and they're using technology to make it easier for their customers, who are both financial advisors and investors, to make decisions easier and faster. They can get it when they need it, and they don't have to send them 30-page reports every quarter. They can get it online. They can see how much they're paying for their investments and how much those investments are bringing back to them in a much clearer way than just 5 or 6 years ago. It's one of the biggest trends, and not just financial services. I would say across almost any business you can look at, things becoming greener, simpler, more transparent, and easy to use. I mean, what was the magic of? And we mentioned Apple in a previous segment, but why did Apple? What was one of the big brand qualities of Apple? What made people like Apple? Ease of use. It made things easy. They took away, in a sense, all the choices that you had in Microsoft Windows and other products. And by the way, Windows itself was make things easier. I mean, before that was MS-DOS, and you had to learn all this code. Windows made it easier.
Command prompt.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Shift P.
Well, that's making things easier. And what's Uber? I mean, what is Uber doing, or Lyft, or Waze, or any of these companies involved in transportation? They're all about, making it easier to get from point A to point B, and make it more transparent as well. I took an Uber out here, right? I didn't realize I could send a text to you saying, "Oh, by the way, I'm arriving 10 or 15 minutes later than I planned because of LIE traffic, yada yada." But I was able to send a note to you saying right where I was, so I didn't have to send another note saying I'm almost there. You could just see.
I felt like NORAD.
But I think simplicity and transparency are the big trends going across all industries right now. I mean, you pick one, name one, and I can give an example. But
are they effective enhancing a brand, or are they just buzz?
enhance. I think that, let me put it this way. It's a response to what people are asking for. I don't think, I mean, if you're making a product and you're selling a product to someone, you're not making people buy it. You're responding to, what demand. I mean, you're not creating demand. I mean, in ways, some would say, I mean, the smartphone. When the smartphone came out, when the first smartphone, Apple's first smartphone came out, and Samsung Galaxy there soon after, I wasn't one of the early adopters. I was like, I love my BlackBerry. You know what I mean? But then, but then I realized, oh wow, I could do. And this goes back to what I was talking about: simplicity, making things easier. Suddenly, I realized, oh wait, I can do these 5 or 10 things on my smartphone that I used to use these other 3 or 4 devices for. I can make appointments. I can get an Uber. I can make a reservation in a restaurant. I can do whatever. You can do anything.
I can find things.
I can find things. Right. But that was, I don't think it's about buzz. I think it's the other way around. I think that, going to, decluttering, simplicity, ease of use, these are responses to what people are asking for. I don't think that people are, we're creating a market. We're responding to one.
Yeah, I'll give you an analogy of something interesting. I have a friend who's in the vending business, and he sells soda, snacks, things like that. And yet he gets people say, no, I gotta watch myself. I want to eat better. So he'll order all this stuff, granola bars, water, whatever, and then they don't buy it. It's like they want it, but then when he goes back to the sort of the more junkier foods, that's what actually sells. Mm-hmm. So even though they say they want the healthier stuff, they actually don't pull the trigger, so to speak. They don't actually put their actions behind their intentions.
Well, that comes to aspirational is what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
So brands, I mean, and it's a big word when it comes to brands. What do people aspire to? Why do you see ads with these cars, and you see Mac McConaughey driving what is it, a Buick? I can't remember what car.
It was a Cadillac, but I don't remember.
I can't remember, but I mean, are we?
I always think of Bruce Springsteen with Cadillacs.
A pink Cadillac. But I mean, you're buying an idea, right? You're buying and it's it's aspirational, a lot of this stuff. I mean, yes, I would love to have my life to be less cluttered, more organized. And I'm going to buy products and things that are going to help me get to that. Now, whether I actually use them or not is another thing, but it is something I aspire to as a consumer.
But is that
consumer.
But is that because our lives became more cluttered? Because when you think about it, there was less density way back when, New York City 50, 75, 100 years ago certainly wasn't as pressed together, as it is now. And you have people living in these almost like micro apartments. So in a way, are people just screaming for products to kind of relieve them from some of the existences that they have, that they live in a overly complicated, overly bureaucratic, cluttered world, and they just need to spread out against that, to push back against it.
Well, one of the ironies of this whole sort of trend to declutter is that at the same time this is happening, the amount of space, and I'm sure there's plenty of studies I could look up, you could find online, the amount of space that people use for self-storage and storage is just exploding. So we have a client actually at Jay Connolly who's involved in this, and one of the things that I've learned from working with this client is that on the one hand everybody says they want to have a clutter-free, simpler life, and yet on the other hand, instead of getting rid of all this stuff, they put it in storage. So they actually pay someone to keep all the stuff that they're not using and they don't want to sort through.
Right. What they really want is to just not deal with the clutter, but because people still want to have possessions of stuff. People like stuff. That's what they like,
There was a George Carlin thing about stuff, wasn't there?
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
Yes. Now,
to get more stuff.
Now, what's interesting is I represent a group of people who are in the imaging business. And when you think about it, look at all the law firms that are out there, because that's my principal line of work. And they have real estate that they use to house files, boxes, whatever. And yet, let's say they're in Manhattan, expensive real estate, and they got offices full of papers and files and litigation folders and Redwells and all this other stuff. And yet, if they went paperless, because they scanned everything, they wouldn't be paying to house the real estate for the paper, which really it's not a productive asset. It's more like a liability. but for some reason we can't get people to necessarily make that jump yet.
Well,
Yeah.
no, but that's happening though in the legal. It is happening.
No, it's slow. It's just slow. Yeah, 10 years from now will be the norm, but we're not there yet.
I mean, there's through one of our clients, I got to go to this conference that happens in New York every year, hosted by ALM Media, called Legal Tech.
I've been to Legal Tech.
Right.
Yeah, you know what they did? I'm gonna actually tell them about their brand. I went for years and years. I bought stuff and I go every year. Then they started charging. And it's like, don't charge me to go to a place where you're selling. It's like, could you imagine I have to pay Macy's for the privilege of shopping? You know, maybe it works at Costco, but to me, it was a bad idea. And I think attendance suffered this past year because it was the first year they actually charged.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. I was very upset with that.
Wow. Well,
and they changed the whole show because they used to do more continuing legal education. Oh, we'll talk about this offline. I have lots of comments about their branding on that topic.
But Legal Tech, I mean, I use this as an example of the whole conference is about technology for law firms, and they have hundreds and hundreds of companies.
E-discovery.
Right. But that's another sort of tendency. It's another sort of, in addition to, simplifying, decluttering, also leveraging technology, using technology in ways that allow, let's say, and using financial advisors as an example, since we work with a lot of them at Jay Connolly, allowing someone who has a practice, and I have X number of clients, to be able to add more clients, but at the same time service the ones they have better than before. And how do you do that unless you create more time in the day? Well, you do it by becoming more efficient. And, companies that do this, and I'm using financial advisors as an example because we worked with a lot, the ones that aren't doing that aren't growing, and the ones that are growing. They're able to service clients that have much smaller accounts and have more of them, and not just the super high net worth clients, and grow their business by leveraging technology. And that's, financial advisor, I'm just using that as an example, but that's another huge trend across many industries.
So in the 1 minute we have left, what are the emerging brand issues that we have not yet discussed that companies, regardless of their size, should be cognizant of? What should they be looking for?
That we've not discussed yet?
Yeah, that we have not discussed. Is there anything that's on the horizon yet that is maybe down the road a bit or peaking or?
Automation.
Okay, well, that's a big problem because, the robots are going to put us all out of jobs.
Yeah, well, I talked about leveraging technology, but the downside of that is, if I'm using an automated process or some kind of robot, whatever, to replace 5 people, and everybody's doing that, 5 jobs, and what are those people going to do? That's a big problem that I think is rapidly becoming a much bigger problem, not just for the United States, but for the world over the next. It's happening quicker than people think. What are people who aren't experts in technology or know this technology? What are they going to do for a living?
Well, the good news is, at least I'll still be a radio host. And with that, we got to cut it here. Thanks for listening. Tom Vogel, you're an amazing guest. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate you coming back this time. Thanks, everyone, for listening. See you next week. Be safe out there.